Hi all, we'll just give everyone another 30 seconds or so to join us as there's a few people still attending, and we'll go from there. Hi guys, welcome to this week's webinar. It's in regards to the buy-to-let loopholes. Now, obviously, we're going to be talking about certain things that you can and you can't do. We're going to be talking about certain tax implications. What we have to legally say is that obviously we're not qualified tax advisors, so we'll always say to people that what we say is going to depend on your own personal circumstances. Therefore, it's always best to discuss something with a legal representative that's qualified in these particular areas. However, there are some things that we can give advice on, which we know that when we speak to people on a daily basis, that certain people just simply aren't aware of. And when we say loopholes, these are just minor tips that we can help out with. Yeah, hopefully you guys will find it useful. So let's talk about the loophole. So the most important thing, the reason why we wanted to do this webinar is, as we say, a lot of the time when we're speaking to clients, they don't know the ramifications of laws and legislation that's coming in, such as the mortgage rates and the tapered relief that's going to take the mortgage rates right down in terms of what you can actually deduct from tax. But they also don't know the benefits of things like purchasing commercial property in regards to stamp duty and what actually even classes as commercial property. As soon as we say commercial property to people, they automatically think of a shop front or a warehouse. Well, actually, commercial property extends far beyond that. And again, that's something that we'll be discussing today. So Paul's here with me as well. The loopholes that are going to be closed and certain things that are out there are the tax changes. So Paul, could you run us through sort of like the tax changes and the tapered relief and what's happening and things like that?
Yeah, hi there guys. Well, the basic story here is that the mortgage relief you used to be able to get as a higher rate taxpayer was obviously quite key. And the government, in their wisdom to calm down the buy-to-let market, decided that the best way they could try and attempt to control this was by making it a bit more difficult for you guys to invest in property and make the benefits you get by doing so more difficult to attain. So this first change is the mortgage relief. It's going to be tapered in over a 3-year period, which started back in 2017. And what it means is that the basic taxpayer, you get your 20% relief. Any higher than that, the 45%, 40% taxpayers, those people will now lose that relief. As I say, it is being phased out over a 3-year period, and it's going to be implemented, as I say, back in 2017. This will, I mean, there is no way to avoid this. It's something that's going to happen. There's no loopholes or any tricks we've got with this one that are obvious. There are some things we can do. The only thing I would say that the impact on basic tax rate payer obviously is zero. It's something that's quite helpful. It's something that's actually leveled the playing field for a lot of people as well. So the changes are coming in. There's not a lot we can do to avoid it. There's some few little things you can do to help mitigate it. But as I say, it's a 3-year period it's coming in, and by 2020 the full impact will be felt.
I think that, as I say, quite a lot of people are still counting on the fact that they can take the mortgage interest out of actually what they gain. But as I say, that's falling year by year, 25%, 50%, 75%, and then by 2020 that will be totally gone. So again, we need to work out other ways. We need to work out other strategies that we can get around that in order to increase. Now, the government originally did that. They wanted to calm down the buy-to-let market, so they're putting all of these things in place. However, what we notice people are doing is all they're simply doing is passing it on to tenants. They're passing on the lack of savings that they'll make. They're actually passing them on to tenants. So actually, what we're noticing is that the actual buy-to-let landlord isn't actually affected too dramatically. Significant changes to the higher rate taxpayer, and again, lead to large increase in costs. What we also say as well is what some people are doing is what I've noticed is they're putting their properties in the names of their partners or children who actually are a lower rate taxpayer. Again, Paul, I don't know if you're experiencing the same thing your end, but quite a lot of my clients, they're saying, well, actually, I'm going to put it in my child's name, or
you can do that. There's other stuff you can do. There's a piece we've written that you can find on our website, which we'll publish to you later. But there's other ways of getting around this. Obviously, because passing on the higher cost to a tenant isn't ideal. Tenants tend to be stretched or complain anyway. So there's an option to perhaps pass some of it across, but that, as I say, isn't ideal. The other option here is there's ways of funding. You could switch to shorter term fixed mortgages, which come at lower rates. They do carry more risk. You could put your properties into a company portfolio. Again, another option there, you would only pay a lower rate of tax on that, or corporation tax, which is obviously lower than your income tax if you're a higher level. Problem with that we found with a lot of people, some of our customers and clients we have presently have tried to set up through company structures. If you're borrowing money for that company, the mortgages available are far less easy to attain, and it's something you must consider if you are switching. If your funding is in place and you've got your company structure and that company structure is allowed to borrow money, then again, at this point, I would suggest perhaps dropping these properties into a company structure would benefit in the longer run. So there are three which I say would consider the best options, as Chris mentioned earlier, that the passing over to a spouse or to another member of the family, if they're not higher rate taxpayers, is a good idea. But again, be mindful that if you're passing these properties across, these people do have to avoid that higher rate tax level. So be mindful of the level of income they retain from these properties, and stop once you've obviously hit their max.
And then, as we all know, the stamp duty, that's been a major bugbear for a lot of clients. I mean, the extra 3% on top has really put people off from buying higher end properties. For example, places in London, we've noticed a lot of people change tact. Again, it's something that is not straightforward to get around. There are certain ways to get around it, which Paul explained in a sec, but there are certain things that people are doing at the moment to get around that. But one main bit of advice that we give people is, look, if you've got 500,000, 600,000, whatever it may be, budget, if you buy one property with that, you're going to be hit for a decent chunk of stamp duty. You're best to split that into 3 or 4 properties. Spread the risk. It lowers your stamp duty charge. Your stamp duty spread across all 4 properties, but also it brings down the percentage that you're paying. So rather than paying 5, 6, 7, 8%, which you'd be paying, you're paying simply a 3% surcharge if they're under a certain amount. So it's definitely worth splitting rather than going for one big chunk of a property. Paul, have you come across anything your side in regards to stamp duty when you speak to your clients?
Well, the thing we've been looking at in the loophole, the stamp duty or the HMRC failed to consider when they were trying to make these changes was, and it's the story around ownership of the property, and it's a technicality. It's something I would perhaps discuss with an accountant, but it is something that's been pointed out, and it all revolves around ownership and when you buy a second property. So if, as a couple, if you're buying a second property, the loophole that seems to have occurred is a difference between property law and the HMRC ruling. They use a phrase in the HMRC ruling that says major interest in a property. Now that rule states that any stake in a property is a major interest as far as the HMRC are concerned. Now please bear with me, because this is where the loophole occurs. Property law, on the other hand, states that an undivided share when ownership is split between two people does not satisfy its requirement, and therefore the charge does not apply, therefore it's not a major interest. So by reducing your interest in the original property you partly own together, you can then go forward as the second buyer can go forward as a person who hasn't got a major interest in the other property, therefore coming underneath or below the HMRC rules, and therefore would not be subject to this surcharge. Again, take a look at the article we've written, have a little read, see what it says, because it does go into a little bit more detail and will help you explain. If you haven't quite grasped that, but the one thing I do say is it is a technicality. It's not what the HMRC intended, and in my view, the HMRC, if too many people spot it or it gets abused, they shut it down. But one to be noted, and one that I would suggest talking to your accountant about.
There's also a couple of clients that I've had as well. What they've done is they've actually purchased a property for themselves, and they've actually rented out their original home. So rather than buying the home and saying, they're going to use that as the buy-to-let, they've actually got around it by purchasing a property, living in the new property that they've purchased, and actually renting out the original home. So that's something that's potentially looking at. If you're looking, most people can only do that if it's local. So it's advantageous to those clients who are in Manchester or Liverpool anyway, and because that makes such a great buy-to-let area. But it's definitely something where that's something to consider. So they've actually, as I say, purchased a second home and rented out the original one. But again, I think the big thing with the 3% surcharge is going back to the commercial side and going back to commercial property. Student property is something that we're really big advocates of, not because it's students and not just simply because it gives 8-9% net yields, but because of the fact that you're saving so much. You can save a huge amount of stamp duty. So someone's got 300,000, for example, they can go and buy 4 student properties or 1 residential property, and on the residential property they'll pay, give or take, in well over £10,000 in stamp duty. However, on a student property they'll pay none. In terms of the student properties, you're letting it out to a higher caliber of student, which means that a lot of people say, oh, do they get trashed? The 2 questions we always get asked is, do they get trashed, and what's the resale value like? Well, typically the resale value isn't as high as it would be for a residential, because it is simply an investment. That's it. So it's still treated as an investment. So the property price goes up in relation to what the rent goes up. So you're not going to make as much, but there should still be some decent growth there. But also the other question is, is it going to get trashed by a student? Again, we're renting it to a certain caliber of students. They're paying a lot of money for this, 140, 150 pounds a week rental, sort of in the region of 600 pounds a month. And that's a lot of rental. But because of that, they're getting the gymnasiums, the cinema rooms, the call storage where they can do the online shopping, and it gets put in a call room, little bits and pieces like that. And that's why we're getting 8-9%. But it is saving on the stamp duty. A lot of people don't know that they can avoid stamp duty by purchasing student property. So, as I say, you can avoid the extra charge by depending on which one of you goes to buy a student property, buy a property or outright. Sorry, purpose-built student accommodation. As I say, that's another little loophole there. Take a look at that. That's definitely worth considering, especially if you've either got a big chunky deposit, or even if you've got sort of like 70,000-80,000, and you're going to go and get a 60,000-70,000 pound mortgage on top of that. So that takes you over the 125,000 side, and you're going to be paying 5%. Anything between 0 to 125, you'll pay you 3%. So that's 3,000 plus. And anything between 125 up, you're going to be paying you 5%. So again, suddenly you've got 4,000 or 5,000 extra that you've not actually factored for. And again, that could be a year's income, or things like that have to be thought of. in regards to the tax relief, what a lot of people are doing is they're switching to a shorter term fixed rate deal.
That's what we mentioned earlier. So this is, these are going through the points we mentioned with regards to tax relief. So yeah, they do switch to shorter term fixed rate deals. They you receive lower rates of interest because obviously you're not covering yourself for longer periods of time. But the element of risk attached to those is that if the interest rate environment changes and you come out of a lower fixed rate term and you go to a new one, it may have jumped quite a bit. So that's your first element, and we carried on with the other stuff. Put it in a portfolio for a limited company. You all know the advantages about that. There are disadvantages. Obviously, if you're borrowing money within a company, it becomes more difficult. You have to have income from outside the property you're dropping in. It can be other properties, which is not a problem, but you have to initially start with perhaps a cash purchase, drop a property in there, that earns you income. Then the next one, you could use income from the other property to perhaps fund that second one.
Quite a few people as well, Paul, I don't know if you've noticed that they might have 6, 7, 8 properties. They may only have one property in their name, and they then say, oh, how about putting that in a limited company? But that also incurs stamp duty.
It does, yeah. You can't just transfer these things across. You have to go through a process of buying and selling. So as a company, you have to buy it from yourself. So it's something, if you're building a portfolio, and it's as I say, it's not straightforward because borrowing money against it. But if you've already got an existing property, I know it sounds a bit punitive, but you may be better off to drop that property in that company now and then build for the future, because you've got that company and that business in, it's creating an income. You can then go to the next one and say, the property I've got in there already, although I only paid a stamp duty charge to get me in there, get in there, it's an income that you can use to then fund further property purchases. But remember, you do need to be able to borrow cash that not necessarily dependent on that property you're dropping in there at the time. And the list of lenders that lend to companies does get considerably smaller. So that's a definite one you've got to watch for. Yeah, and then obviously the transfer of ownership, which Chris alluded to earlier, put it into your spouse's name or other members of the family. Again, property for them, ownership is fine. If they're not high rate taxpayer or lower rate taxpayer, whatever, that sort of thing, you can create an income stream for them that doesn't incur higher tax rates. So they're the options around tax relief. Generally, what does this mean for buy to let? Well, our comment's always been it's a very good market to be in. It's continuing to be a good market. Obviously, we're going to say that we're in the business, but it still is a big business. The reason why the government have put these conditions in place is to make it difficult to raise the bar for investors, perhaps, to get the more professional landlords in place, to stop everyone doing it, to keep the prices controlled. But if you manage well and you go through your processes, get your business plan lined up, which I've gone through many times, and you work your costs out, you're quite diligent around how you do what you're doing, and it is a business. It just creates a better market for everyone. It creates a better group of landlords. You get a better set of tenants, and the property market becomes, an efficient place to be in. And this is where it should be going, and way more professional. As it says in this last one, leave serious investors who spend time and effort planning and structuring a solid business model to flourish, and that benefits everyone. And that's sort of where we expect this market to carry on going and building, because it leaves the guys in there that don't just think, oh, I've got a few quid, I can buy a property and rent it out and make money. And we all know what happens when that model goes wrong. Property market crashes when people start can't affording and things go wrong and interest rates start to rise, and there's some people out there that can't afford to do this. What it does do, it creates a market where we could potentially see a crash, and that's what I think the government's also trying to avoid. So it keeps the market clean, fresh, and occupied or sort of populated by professional business investors, and not people that are sort of potluck and got a few quid they found and think that's a good idea to buy a property and they only ever go up. Because we all know they do go down as well. You've got to be aware of that, but you've got to be able to weather any storm. And if you had a good model in place and you'd priced it correctly and your business was a business, you will be able to weather any storm you have. It's as simple as that, and that's the idea.
There are certain other little tips and loopholes. For example, if you look at holiday homes, certain holiday homes, you've got certain perks, and this is something that you need to note down. It's business asset rollover relief. That's something that you can attract. Again, there's entrepreneurs relief, and there's other capital gains tax benefits. So there are certain little loopholes that, again, for me, it all comes down to what Paul just said and planning. I know we say every single webinar, get a business plan. And this is what this market is about now. This market, go back 3 or 4 years, and there was, you could literally come in with 50, 100, 150 grand, whatever you had, and you can make money quite easily. You didn't really have to worry too much about planning. You just, bought any property and you'd have pretty much been all right. It now needs planning. It is a business. So you need to do that. Whether you're going to get the capital gains tax, the entrepreneurs relief, the rollover relief from the holiday homes, whether you're going to buy a student property and save on stamp duty, you need to plan. You need to think, well, if I'm buying a student property and saving stamp duty, what's my plan going forward? What's my plan over 5 years? Because does the stamp duty savings get outdone by the fact that there's a lack of growth in student property in comparison to residential? So if you're going to plan to keep it 10 years, I would say no, go for residential. If you're going to plan to keep it 3 to 5 years, I would say no, go student. So there's a lot of things, a lot of variables that you need to ask yourself before we even think about what tips and what loopholes that you can actually get into. So overall, guys, I think that's the key that I would take away. Regardless of the options, regardless of the little tips and loopholes, you first need to make sure that it suits you in regards to getting some qualified advice. But also, you need to ensure that everything is planned from the start. You need to think about your exit strategy, ironically, before you even put a penny down. You need to think about when you're looking to get out of the investment and what you're looking to get out of the investment before you've even put that initial reservation fee and that initial reservation form down. So any questions, guys? Again, I say every week, I think you've got a speech bubble or some question marks on the left-hand side. And yeah, any questions? Right, I've got one here. I bought an off-plan one-bed student accommodation in Liverpool. I bought it for 95,000. When will be a good time to sell? It's complete in January 19. Should I sell immediately or hold for longer? Again, without knowing the exact location and the exact size of the property, it's really tough to tell, because, for example, you could have spent 95,000 on a 15 square meter property, for all I know, or you could have bought a 50 square meter property, which mean it'd be a great time to sell. My advice is if you've bought a student property, it's not a quick turnaround. The money that's generated from a student property is okay. You've just come through with 500 and okay. You've got 551 square meters. Do you mean square feet? I'm assuming there. So
the bottom line with a student property, you buy it for one reason only. It's the return on investment. It's a capital. It's an income earner. You never buy a student property for growth. So to sell it before you've even earned a penny on it is probably not what's intended. Will you get the same money for it? Yeah, probably will. There's a demand for property out there. But the reality is, with student properties, you're buying them as an income model, and you're buying them as an investment for that basis. If you wanted to buy a property to make capital growth on, you're probably better off for buying a purely residential property. Liverpool's a good area. It's been good in the last few years, and someone like Manchester, a good capital growth area. Yeah, I would have steered clear of student properties. They do not tend to attract capital growth in that sense. They will grab some, but they will be small compared to residential property.
And another tip that we can give people is flipping. You pay stamp duty when you complete on the property. So, for example, you buy a property, let's go round figures, £100,000, and you have to put down 20%. So you put down your £20,000. When you pay the other 80,000, that is when the property attracts stamp duty. However, there are some developers that we're dealing with where they've got what's called assignable contracts. That means you can sell that property before you complete. So if you actually sell the property before you complete, you don't pay stamp duty, but you can still benefit from the profit. So I've got a number of clients who never complete on a property. All they're simply doing is they're putting down deposits and they're waiting for about 3 months prior to completion, and they're selling at a decent profit as well. And they're doing this day in, day out, and on a regular basis. As soon as we get a new development, if it's 6 months to go until it's been developed, it's not long enough. They want 18 to 24 months because that's when you're going to get a lot of growth. I had a client recently who bought a property for 130,000. When I say recently, this was he's now selling it. So he bought it 18 months ago for 130,000. It's now on the market for 215, 220 within the space of 18 months. That's a big chunk, and he doesn't have to pay any stamp duty on that. So again, that's another little tip and a bit of a loophole. If you get something with reassignable contracts, then that's something that you don't have to complete on. So please explain the property law versus the HMRC. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to put this on because I think sometimes
it's quite long-winded. It's quite complex, and if I go through it over the webinar, you might go, "Hang on, I've lost track of that." Have a little read. We're going to post it. There'll be a full piece on it, so you can read through it at your leisure, and that'll explain the little loophole. But it's something, as I say, the little proviso I make at the end of the conversation is that please seek advice from your accountant. And the only other thing I would say about HMRC, if the intention was to do one thing and the law loophole allows you to do something else, they will attempt to close it down. So they will make a mission, if people abuse it, of closing it down. So it does come with an element of risk, and something I would be very aware of, and I discuss that with my accountant. They will be aware of it, they will know what they're saying, and they'll advise you properly. But yeah, read it, speak to someone that's qualified about it, and then make a decision what you want to do.
Got the next question here. In regards to student property, why doesn't it attract stamp duty? Okay, well, it comes under the class. Again, this comes down to the lawyer that you use. It's obviously, they class it as a commercial property. It has a certain license. It has every property, whether it's retail, whether it's residential, has a license. So, for example, a C3 license for a typical residential apartment. And you can get your A1, B1 licenses for retail. So this comes under commercial property. So that's why the lawyer, it doesn't attract the stamp duty side of things. So again, like Paul said, there are certain things that they may close these little loopholes. The things may change. They may realise that student property is a big business. When I first started doing student property 5-6 years ago, it was probably about a 750 to £1 billion market a year, which sounds a lot, but it's not really. However, come sort of like last year, you're talking about a £5.5 to £6 billion market. So it's getting so much more traction now. Now, of course, what may happen is HMRC may turn around and say, well, actually, suddenly if we've got a £5 billion market that we're not charging stamp duty on, we're losing out 3% stamp duty. That's a lot of stamp duty. So again, I've got no qualms in saying that I believe over the next sort of 5 to 8 years, as that market increases and it suddenly starts to creep up to the 10 to 12 billion, which I've got no doubt it will do, then I'm pretty sure that the HMRC are going to see that as a bit of a cash cow for them. They've already missed out on 5 years of that, so I think that that's something that probably will take place. Next question here, business and entrepreneurs relief. Again, without going into too much detail, I basically looked these things up. So things like on the holiday homes, where you get business asset rollover relief and entrepreneurs relief and certain other capital gains tax benefits. Again, this is something that you've got to look up and just make sure. I'd go on the government website, I'd go on the HMRC website and just make sure that it actually is within your remit, because there's certain relief for people that won't, for one person that won't be for the next person. We can only give generalized tips. Doesn't matter whether that's this, doesn't matter whether that's about renting your main home, buying another property. What suits one, there's no hard and fast rule. What suits one will suit another. So again, we're going to publish this. We're going to put this online. We'll put some links to the government website as well. And that's something, as I say, that even then, I would still get advice. If you're looking to, move with something like this, that's something that I would go and get, advice on, qualified advice from an accountant who can literally put pen to paper and say, yes, you will not be charged this, or, you will make this amount of money, whatever it may be. But again, it all stems back from, if you come to us first, we would say, let's get that business plan. Let's make sure that we know when you're looking to sell, how much money you've got, what your main aims are. It can't just be, I've got 100 grand and I want to make more than I'm making in the bank. That's too random. That's too vague. We need to have details of your plans. For example, if you have children that are 12 or 13, maybe you'll need something when they're 18 to go to university, grandchildren, whatever it may be. We need to plan for the next sort of 5-10 years and make sure it's right for you. All right, guys. Well, look, this is going to be published shortly. There'll be the article that comes out on our blog, and there'll also be the webinar that gets published on the site as well. So yeah, I hope you have a lovely rest of the day, and anything else you need, you know where we are. Just give us a call and we'll answer any questions we have. Take care, have a good day.